We're going to have to seal up those borders.
He made immigration the centerpiece of his campaign.
We're like a garbage can for the world.
And when he's back in the White House, President-elect Trump has promised to immediately crack down with mass deportations of people in the country illegally.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
Well, see, one of the things about the immigration debate is they talk about immigrants in the abstract, and there are no immigrants in the abstract, as that passage indicates. And we don't know who those people are that are here. They may all be PhDs from the University of Chicago, in which case they should all stay. Or they may in fact be people who majored in sociology at Berkeley, in which cases get them all out of here as soon as possible. But we don't know. That's one of the problems of so-called immigration policy. We don't have an immigration policy unless we control the border. It doesn't matter what our policy is. If anybody who wants to cross the border can cross, then our policy is just a bunch of words on paper.
America has allowed gangs to enter our country.
The migrants that are coming, they're taking over every block right now.
The city of Chicago is going to up in smoke, it's going to up in flames.
Gangs in Chicago are angry over the influx of migrants and criminals in their city. They say money that should be going to the African American community on the South Side is instead going to what they call non-citizens, and warn that turf wars between Chicago's gangs and groups like Venezuela's Tren de Aragua could see Chicago, quote, go up in flames.
New tonight reaction coming in as MS-13 gang members are accused of killing a 15-year-old boy in Maryland. The teen last seen back in February, and Fox 5 obtaining court documents indicating the child was found dismembered.
Right this morning, Houston police providing an update on two young men accused of murdering a teenager as part of a satanic ritual.
That's right. Well, the Houston Police Department, the FBI, and DPS are now all investigating this case and a connection between the MS-13 gang and the victim in this case. Now take a look at these two pictures. These are the two men the Houston Police Department believe are MS-13 gang members responsible for killing a 15-year-old girl execution style in a satanic ritual and then leaving her body in a ditch. This morning, Houston police told us they think they now know the identity of the girl, but they are not releasing that information to the public at this time. Investigators say her accused killers confessed to the crime after they were arrested. 22-year-old Miguel Alvarez Flores, there you see on the left, and 18-year-old Diego Hernandez Rivera on the right appeared in court this week. Now, according to HPD, most MS-13 gang members are in this country illegally, and these two murder suspects could be as well. Police say they have reported the two to Homeland Security. Now, an investigator told us this morning that officers found evidence in the apartment where these gang members were keeping underage girls that led police to believe there was some sort of satanic ritual activity happening there. Now, HPD says there were 3 underage girls in the apartment of the murder suspects, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old who was murdered, and then a 16-year-old girl. Police say the 14-year-old told detectives she was kidnapped, drugged, and sexually assaulted by members of the MS-13 gang. Now, the 14-year-old also reportedly told investigators she was moved from one apartment to another, forced into consuming drugs and alcohol, then at one point was held down as Alvarez Flores tattooed the image of the Grim Reaper on her body from her knee down to her foot. This girl also told police the 15-year-old at the apartment was a girl named Genesis. She believes Genesis is the girl found dead on February 16th. The witness also told investigators there was a satanic statue in the apartment, and the gang members said they wanted to offer the beast a soul.
You are watching surveillance footage showing 5 asylum seekers who viciously attacked police officers in New York's Times Square as the cops were attempting to detain another man. Now, the assault happened last Saturday when police attempted to disperse a disorderly group of people. ABC News reports that when officers attempted to place an individual in custody, the suspects began to kick and punch the officers, and then they fled the scene. The suspects luckily were later arrested. The suspects were identified Wednesday as Yorman Reveron, 24 years old, Darwin Andres Gomez, Isquiel, 19 years old, Wilson Jarez, 21, Kelvin Arocha, 19, and then Joan Boada, 22 years old. So they face some charges, including assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct, and gang assault. Now, it is being widely reported now by local news outlets in New York that the individuals who carried out these assaults are actually asylum seekers. The assault took place in front of a migrant shelter, and there have been increasing scuffles with migrants between one another for the most part, but this is the first time that we're seeing surveillance footage of them literally attacking cops and being kind of brazen and emboldened enough to do something like that. One of them already had a criminal record. Reveron has 2 pending cases in Manhattan for assault and robbery. He allegedly attacked a loss prevention officer at a Macy's department store during an alleged robbery, and also allegedly punched and bit a Nordstrom Rack employee in November. I don't want to get ahead of myself here because I have a whole argument that I'm about to make, but let me just say this. Considering the lack of resources for migrants, considering the fact that you have a situation in which there isn't enough shelter and you have migrants sleeping outside, can we deport the migrants who are engaging in this kind of behavior and this kind of crime? Like, one of them has already gotten arrested twice for assaulting employees at retail stores. And then you have the surveillance footage of them kicking cops in the head as the cops are trying to detain another guy. Why? What are we doing? So they get arrested and then they're let out. No bail, because it's New York City, of course. Okay, listen, I know we have a giant left-wing audience, and I love you guys. Please don't give in to some knee-jerk reaction to provide cover for these people. These are not people you need to provide cover for. These are people who are in the country claiming asylum. They don't have a right to be here. It is a privilege to be able to take advantage of our asylum program and be able to claim asylum, claim that you're here because of whatever reason. I don't know exactly which reason they gave for their asylum claim, and you get to have your case adjudicated in front of a judge. But if you're causing all sorts of chaos, and if you're assaulting police officers, like, the idea that we're not even having a conversation about immediately deporting them is ridiculous. But then not only that, they get arrested and immediately released without bail because of bail reform in New York. That's insane.
We are going to start the largest mass deportation in the history of our country because we have no choice. It's not sustainable. And we are going to start with violent criminals, and we're going to start then with criminals. And our local police is going to work with us because they know everything about the people. They know their names. They know everything about them. They know their middle name. They know their numbers.
In the wake of a San Francisco shooting that garnered national attention, the immigration debate has centered on sanctuary cities. The term sanctuary city refers to local governments who limit its assistance in federal immigration enforcement. Sanctuary policies began to formalize in the 1980s after a movement of churches sought to provide shelter and resources for unauthorized Central American immigrants who fled civil war and violence. Sanctuary policies differ from city to city, but generally the local policies instruct city employees and law enforcement to not ask the immigration status of criminal suspects. Proponents for sanctuary cities say this policy is necessary in balancing public safety with a respect for civil rights. By not inquiring a criminal's immigration status, proponents say it maintains trust in immigrant communities, making it easier to fight crime. Opponents argue that sanctuary policies endanger local communities. By ignoring a criminal's immigration status, it effectively shields convicted criminals from deportation, releasing some back into the community. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, more than 200 cities and counties in the United States have policies that make them immigration sanctuaries.
1,500 calls to police over the last year. That's how many calls for service came from the apartments where San Antonio police arrested multiple suspected members of a Venezuelan gang.
Those calls include more than 140 calls for shots fired, several burglaries, and a dozen assaults in progress.
19 people ended up being arrested in Saturday's raid, including a handful of members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. One runner tells our Garrett Berger the migrants also victims in this.
But 3 days after a police raid cleared nearly 300 vacant apartments and resulted in 19 arrests, including 4 members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, things are quiet. I go out in the afternoons and enjoy the good weather with my neighbors here. Vasquez said there were a lot of migrants from different nationalities of the complex. He doesn't know if the people around had been members of Tren de Aragua.
Vasquez says there were people who would go into the vacant apartments just to be able to stay there. But he said he also had a friend who got scammed into thinking they were renting here.
There were some people that came to the shelter and they would say, sign this contract. I have an apartment for you for $900 with everything, including deposit and 1 month free. That's what they'd say. And they would come with all their clothes and belongings, and the office would show up and remove them. And they'd show them the contract. But no, it wasn't a contract. It was fake. As to who's to blame, he doesn't think it was only Venezuelans doing this scam. The ones he knew of had different accents. Vasquez says no problems, if any, were, in fact, caught up in the raid. We would like everything to be like before, when I first arrived in this country. Everyone was friendly, and everything was very nice. I couldn't find a job, but right now that has been very hard. If you say you're Venezuelan, they don't want to give you a job.
Today, our cities are flooded with illegal aliens. Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs are taken. By the way, you know who's taking the jobs that are created? 107% of those jobs are taken by illegal aliens. And you know who's being hurt the most by millions of people pouring into our country? The black population and the Hispanic population, because they're taking the jobs from our black population, our Hispanic population.
If you're an undocumented individual and you want to know how to legally earn money while you're here in the United States, stay tuned. Hi everyone, my name is Maribel, your favorite immigrant money coach, and this is for anybody who's undocumented. So step 1 is you got to get your ITIN. You can either go to a tax preparer to help you fill out Form W7, or you can go directly to the IRS and get this number. Step 2 is you have to establish a company and then get an EIN number from the IRS. Your tax preparer may be able to help you with this too. Step number 3 is you have to then start applying to jobs as a contractor or freelancer via that EIN number, and you don't have to put your immigration status on the forms.
And Dan, do you believe that immigrants take jobs away from Americans? Is that, I mean, obviously you believe that they're putting a massive strain on our social safety net and on taxpayers, but do you believe that illegal immigrants are taking jobs away from Americans?
Yeah, well, you said illegal immigrants, okay. Illegal immigrants who's a substitute level of skills, who's a substitute for an American worker, by definition increases labor supply in that niche and erodes bargaining leverage for American workers. In construction, service industries, places where people illegally have been working, there's no question about it. Now, I know you can say, oh, look at this guy working 18 hours a day for cash under the table. No American would do that job. That's because we have jobs that aren't paying a decent living wage. The work would get done without the illegal workers here. It would be done by fewer American workers being paid far higher wages.
And what about the cost of goods that might result from that workforce? I'm just curious, do you think Americans are willing to...
What happened to our society that the level of social distance has creeped into the point where we've now become a two-tier society, where those of us driving our Jaguars and our Volvos and our Mercedes look at there's this different class of people who do the dirty work. The stability of our 20th century political experiment was built on the strength of a stable middle class from the 40s, 50s, 60s, the civil rights movement, strong unionization, the narrowing of the gap between wealthy and poor. Engineers and lawyers didn't make that much more than people who were unionized workers in mass production consumption industries. We are now relegating a lot of service jobs and agriculture and food to a form, kind of a modern form of indenture, where people are apparently not expected to be paid a decent living wage, in exchange for their willingness to come here and be exploited. That is, first of all, we're destroying the American middle class. The native-born population with high school degree or less is dropping out of the labor force. We see the people who are most highly impacted by illegal immigration, the least able to defend themselves politically and financially. It has been a sociological disaster, which now, in the wake of this contracting economy with structural unemployment, people desperate for any kind of a job are suddenly finding themselves colliding in whole industries where they don't hire so-called Native American workers anymore. And that's part of why you see this incendiary response arising politically all across the country over an economic model that might have been acceptable during a debt-infused financial bubble that we had in the last decade is no longer sustainable. And we need to go back to the basic principle that we're all connected as Americans together, and that the less educated among us still need to have a tight enough labor supply that employers will have the incentive to provide wages, working conditions, and benefits. And the only way you're going to do that is by controlling the growth of the labor supply.
One of the most often made arguments with regard to immigration is that they only do jobs that Americans don't want. But in a recent analysis, we actually looked at all 474 occupations as defined by the Department of Commerce and found that there were only 6 that were majority immigrant, and those jobs only account for about 1% of the U.S. workforce. If we look at those jobs where immigrants do tend to be the most concentrated, even in jobs like maids, we found that 1/2 were U.S. born. And we also looked at construction labor, and it turns out 2/3 are U.S. born, and even 3/4 of janitors in the United States were actually born here. So it turns out that even jobs that people sometimes think are overwhelmingly done by immigrants are, in fact, the majority of workers were born in this country. We also found that high immigrant occupations do tend to be jobs done by less educated, lower income Americans, though there certainly are exceptions to that. And what that means is that if there is an impact from immigration, it's going to be primarily felt by less educated and lower income Americans. Now, we also looked at illegal immigrants by occupation, and we found that there doesn't appear to be any occupations that the majority of workers are illegal immigrants. Even in agriculture, there are still lots of legal immigrants and even native-born Americans who do agricultural work. Overall, only about 4% of all illegal immigrants actually work in agriculture. Many more work in construction or retail or building, cleaning, and maintenance. The bottom line, though, is that immigration tends to create the most competition for low-income Americans, and Congress should at least consider this question when setting immigration levels in the future.
Sir.
Policy to speech on immigration essentially today. What is the plan from the Trump team to execute this mass deportation? What will that look like in the United States? How will you make that happen?
Well, I think it's very simple, actually. The first thing that you have to do, and the first thing that President Trump will do, is stop the massive inflow of illegal aliens in the first place. You got to stop the bleeding before you can actually fix the problem here, and we still have thousands of people coming across the border illegally every single day. So the first thing you do, you re-implement deportations, you finish construction of the border wall, and you stop proposing mass amnesty for millions of illegal aliens. That solves the majority of the border problem on day one. President Trump already did it, and he will certainly do it again. Now, to your point about what do you do with the people who are already here, I think it's important that we send a message that if you have come to this country illegally, if you plowed into an innocent mom and her daughter and they lost their lives because of your actions, the message from the Trump administration is simple. Pack your bags because in 4 months, you're going home. We do not consent to an invasion of this country for millions of people who shouldn't be here, and we are going to deport people. Now, you start with the people who are most dangerous. You start with the most violent criminals, you make it harder for businesses to hire illegal aliens, and you work your way down from there. And I think that's how you solve the problem of the people who are here. But if you're not willing to tell at least some of the people who are in this country illegally that you have to go back, then you don't have a real border policy. And unfortunately, that's what Kamala Harris has given this country.
2024 will be Liberation Day in America. On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history. I will rescue every city and town that has been invaded and conquered, and we will put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them the hell out of our country and fast. To expedite removal of the Trende Aragua and other savage gangs, I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of, listen to this, 1798. That's an old one. You have to go back that far because As we've grown and grown, our politics and politicians have become weaker and weaker. Our laws don't mean anything. It's so bad what's happening to our country, and we're becoming a very unsafe country, but we're going to be a lot more unsafe when you realize that all of the criminals from every country in the world is being deposited right into our nation, and we're not going to take it. But we're using the Alien Enemies Act, think of that, 1798, but it's a long time ago, to target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil, and it gives tremendous authority to everybody to straighten out our country. We've got to have a country, we've got to have borders, we've got to have fair elections, we've got to have a free press. Look how many people are back there. They're just so many bad. They're so fake, so many of them, they're fake. They're fake. And if these monsters come back into our country, it's an automatic 10 years in jail with no possibility of parole. And I'm hereby calling for the death penalty for any migrant that kills an American citizen or law enforcement officer. And I will immediately ban all sanctuary cities in the United States. We're ending sanctuary cities.
It's estimated there are some 11 million people living illegally in the U.S., 7 million of whom are known to the government.
Any discussion of people in the abstract drives me crazy, because there are no abstract people. 100 years ago, people understood that.
In the wake of the attacks in Israel, border officials say they've seen a growing number of people on the FBI terrorist watch list trying to enter the country through the southern border.
CBS 8's Rocio De La Fe has the details.
Border Patrol officials say that between October of last year and September 30th of this year, 151 migrants with positive terrorism watch list matches were arrested after crossing into the U.S. illegally along the southern border.